Hello and welcome all to our 9th seminar of the Aphasia CRE Seminar series. I'm Michelle Attard, co-facilitator of the seminar series. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous elders, past and emerging, and pay respects to the traditional custodians of all the lands in which we meet today. Also, we continue to acknowledge the difficult and uncertain time of COVID-19 for everybody, and to commend the healthcare staff in our hospitals and communities who are serving patients, clients and families around the world. We're so pleased today to have Dr Rachelle Pitt present for us. Before I introduce her, I'll cover some housekeeping. As you know, we've moved this seminar to an online webinar format due to COVID precautions, and extra Zoom links have been made available for us. So please do be patient with us in the technology. Our apologies in advance if there are any disruptions to your viewing during the seminar. To enhance everybody's Zoom experience, please ensure your microphone is muted and your video is turned off. And so that you can view the slides in the best version possible, please also minimize your Zoom gallery. The seminar is being recorded on Zoom and will be available to access along with past webinar videos via the website. Just click on the resources tab. Videos are usually uploaded 1 to 2 weeks after each seminar. We'd also like to remind you that the CRE has developed a repository of aphasia-friendly COVID-19 resources that have been sourced from across the world. You're welcome to use these resources in your practice. Please contact Dr. Kira Shiggins if you'd like to include any resources in the repository. Questions for today's seminar will be aided by the use of Slido. You can log in anonymously or with your name and ask a question. Our event code is 2509. Enter your question under the Questions tab at any time throughout the presentation. You'll be able to see other questions asked by other audience members, and you can like a question by clicking thumbs up to show those that are of most interest to the group. Rachelle will answer as many questions as time will allow at the end of our presentation. And please also engage with us on social media via Twitter and Facebook. Feel free to tweet along today using the hashtag Aphasia CRE. Please join us as a member of the Aphasia CRE. We welcome people with aphasia, their family, friends, health professionals, researchers, and organisations to our Aphasia CRE community of practice. Benefits to members of the community of practice include a monthly newsletter, updates about events and activities, contributions to research, networking options, and much more. Now, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Dr Rachelle Pitt, the Director of Research and Innovation for West Moreton Health in Queensland. Working clinically as a speech pathologist in rural areas led Rachelle to undertake her PhD research on the use of tele-practice to improve access to services for people with aphasia following stroke. This research led to the development of an online aphasia group intervention called TeleGAIN. Rachelle also has a particular interest in parenting after stroke and the impact that aphasia has on families who have young children, along with transition planning and self-management approaches. Today, Rachelle will be talking us through her research on online aphasia group therapy, which is of course a particularly pertinent topic for many of us at the present time. Thank you, Rachelle.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here today. When I started my PhD research in 2011, I never expected that almost 10 years later, we would be facing a worldwide crisis that would challenge clinicians and researchers to rethink aphasia therapy. That would challenge us to readjust the way that we engage with people with aphasia, and that would challenge us to recalibrate our interventions, both one-on-one and group, to the online environment. Although today I am incredibly excited to share with you what we have learnt about online aphasia therapy through the development of TeleGAIN, I do wish it was different circumstances. Nevertheless, I hope you leave today's session with a renewed sense of the possibilities of telehealth, and you see the opportunities that might be somewhat hidden in these challenging times. I hope to share with you the evidence for online group therapy that we have developed through the work on TeleGAIN and the lessons learned that might be applied to tele-practice for aphasia more broadly. Before we get too far into it, I just wanted to acknowledge my supervisory team who made significant contributions to this research and the Stroke Foundation small project grant that made this possible. So the overarching aim of this program of work was to look at opportunities to improve access to services for people with chronic aphasia. This was driven by my experience working clinically in a rural town in Western Queensland. You can see in the background picture there one of the roads that I actually travelled on a 6-hour round trip to visit one person with aphasia. And more specifically, I was interested in the potential to improve access to group therapy services for people with aphasia who are living in isolated circumstances and find themselves without anyone else with a similar experience. I also thought that these kinds of people would likely benefit from the multifaceted outcomes that group therapy can offer in communication and quality of life. And for many of my patients, the opportunity to connect with others was simply out of the question due to geographical isolation or the service restraints that I was working in. One service delivery method that held promise for these challenges was tele-practice. Speech Pathology Australia defines tele-practice as the application of telecommunications technology to deliver clinical services at a distance for the purposes of assessment, intervention, consultation, and or supervision. Other words that we use when we talk about tele-practice include telehealth, tele-rehabilitation, tele-speech, and tele-SLP. The evidence tells us that tele-practice can reduce travel for the clinician or the patient, saving time and money, which may improve access to services. We also know that it allows clinicians to cover a wide geographical area that can improve the timeliness and intensity of services. And right now, in these challenging circumstances, it allows access to a vulnerable population to the therapy they still need. At the time, although the literature for tele-practice in the management of aphasia was emerging, most of this literature focused on aphasia assessment or one-on-one interventions, and there was very little that had focused or considered aphasia group therapy. So, the aims of this program of work was to develop a multi-purpose aphasia group therapy intervention that targeted all of the domains of the ICF and could be delivered via tele-practice. We wanted to test the feasibility of this and make sure it could work, and then see what outcomes online aphasia group therapy might offer. We also wanted to understand the experience of people with aphasia and their communication partners who participated in the online group, as well as the speech pathologists that delivered the intervention. So I'll start at the beginning. Remote delivery of rehabilitation services is recognised as presenting a unique clinical setting in which the interactions, the resources, and the needs of patients are different from face-to-face. And also, we wanted this intervention to be multi-purpose in nature that targeted all of the areas of the ICF. Therefore, we considered this intervention to be complex in nature and applied the Medical Research Council framework for the development and evaluation of complex intervention to the development process. Due to time today, I'm not going to go through all of these steps, but if you'd like more information, you can find it in IJSLP. The first thing that we did, though, which was incredibly important, was to conduct an extensive literature review of multi-purpose group therapy. And the aim of this review was to define the goals and the session activities that would be included in the intervention. After that review, we came down to 3 important goals that we felt the group could achieve. These were to create opportunities for communicative success, for people with aphasia to share their personal life history, and to provide support for living successfully with aphasia by networking with others. The literature also informed the development of the intervention package, and TeleGAIN is a 12-week, 1.5 hours a week program with each week focusing on a particular topic. For example, family, travel, and movies. We designed TeleGAIN to include between 3 to 4 people with aphasia in each group. We felt that this was important because of the screen size on the computer. We wanted everyone to be able to see each other, but also to make sure that everybody was able to have a turn. The group membership was determined somewhat pragmatically. However, we decided to group people together according to their interests and life stage rather than their time post-onset or the severity of their aphasia. Each session has core and optional activities, which means that each of the sessions can be tailored to the goals of the individual group members. The TeleGAIN manual and all of the PowerPoint sessions to run TeleGAIN are available for download on the Aphasia CRE resource repository. Now, once we had decided on what we wanted to include in each of those sessions, then we needed to translate that into something that could be delivered online. So the next step was to undertake a task analysis to determine how each of these activities could be delivered through a video conferencing platform. A task analysis is the analysis of what steps it takes to perform an activity for which there is a goal and for which there is interaction between a person or people and some kind of stimuli. For example, a really common therapy task, like asking a person with aphasia to participate in a basic auditory word to picture matching activity, actually requires a number of different steps. A spoken word stimulus is required, a range of picture options, and an output modality for the person with aphasia to indicate their response. So when we break it down into these different requirements, we can see that a task analysis allows each of the goal-directed tasks to be broken up into their lowest level of action. And then we can determine the functionality requirements of the tele-practice platform. I cannot recommend this process enough for anyone starting to transition to tele-practice. And it's not just applicable to group therapy, it would be great for any kind of clinical practice transitioning to tele. And what this allowed us to do is to work out the kinds of resources and communication supports that we would need to have online. So for example, we needed communication supports that allowed for choice making or facilitated conversation and word finding. We needed communication supports that could be used to generate written output. And we needed some resources that could serve multiple purposes, depending on the goals of the participants, the severity levels, and their areas of interest. And a really, really important part of TeleGAIN was to also include participants' own resources. So all of the items that you can see on the screen now are from people that participated in TeleGAIN. And we felt this was really important to increase saliency, but also to help with sharing their own personal narrative. These resources were collated into the main therapy pack by the clinician before each session. So now we had worked out the goals, the resources, and the activities. Now we wanted to see what technology we'd need to be able to deliver this package. So we looked at our task analysis and cross-checked across a number of different video conferencing platforms to make sure that the features of that service would be able to do all of the things we needed. We also considered the people with aphasia's accessibility and usability needs. We wanted something that was as easy as possible for somebody to enter and exit and use. And although we implemented this research within a research setting, organisational requirements would also be needed to be considered for clinical implementation. After our review, we actually landed on Adobe Connect because it was easy to use, adaptable, and offered all of the features required to run each session. All that participants needed to do was click on a shortcut on their desktop, which brought them to the website. They could enter their name or any character into the box, click enter, and they would already be in the room to turn on their mic and webcam. So we had this intervention package ready to go, and it was time to see if it worked. We conducted a pilot with 4 people with aphasia, where all of the assessment pre and post was done face-to-face. People were recruited from the Brisbane area, which made it possible to see them in their homes. And we looked at things like technical feasibility, acceptability, therapeutic effect, and patient satisfaction. And the findings from this pilot were really promising. We found that it was feasible to deliver the package over the internet. However, we had frequent connectivity issues. A number of the participants didn't have broadband internet, and this made it really unreliable. We also found that some of our participants without communication partners had some usability issues, particularly with using the mouse. However, participants remained satisfied with the intervention, and we saw some positive trends on the comprehensive aphasia test and ALA. So what we learned from that pilot was that having troubleshooting resources was absolutely essential to be able to run the sessions. We thought that maybe a touchscreen option would be useful for some people who had trouble using the mouse, and also looked at if we could provide 4G internet hotspots to people who had unreliable internet in their home. But most importantly, we had a relatively low uptake for the recruitment, so only 10% of people responded to the study, and we wanted to spread this intervention nationwide. However, in order to do that, we needed to be able to conduct the pre and post assessments online as well. And at the time, there was nothing to demonstrate the validity of the comprehensive aphasia test over the internet. And because that was one of the assessments that showed some sensitivity in our pilot study, we decided to undertake another project to determine if the comprehensive aphasia test could be reliably delivered via tele-practice. So in this study, we had 10 people with aphasia who had internet access in their own home, and we checked their internet connectivity before we commenced the research. And they had varying levels, varying range of months post-onset, and importantly, varying severity levels according to the Australian therapy outcome measures. Following copyright approvals, all of the assessment materials from the CAT were scanned in and collated into the Microsoft PowerPoint presentations. And importantly, they were all done subtest by subtest, because we learnt the hard way that if you put it all together, it takes far too long to load. And the method for this was a simultaneous assessment method, where we had the online speech pathologist leading the assessment via telepractice, while a face-to-face assessor was silent in the person with aphasia's home. There were also notes made regarding the audio and video quality at both sides. And then we compared the scoring from the online and face-to-face clinicians and analysed these results with 3 different analysis methods. So we looked at percent exact agreement, which is exactly raw scores compared to each other, and percent close agreement. And we decided that having a score plus or minus 1 point between the online and face-to-face could be considered clinically acceptable, as this was indicative of the assessor responding to patients being delayed in their response, or if they required a repetition. We felt that plus or minus 2, which would indicate a difference about whether or not the patient was correct or not, was clinically meaningful. We also conducted a Bland and Altman limits of agreement for the T-scores, which looks at the mean difference between the online and face-to-face assessor results and compares them within an agreed range. And the range we used, we took from the CAT manual, which stated a statistically significant difference for each subtest that could be considered clinically meaningful of change. And finally, we conducted a Wilcoxon signed rank test of the T-scores for each subtest. It's important to note that all of the subtests could be rolled up into modality scores. So I've got all of the modality scores there on the screen, which might represent 3 or 4 different subtests under each of those domains. So if we're looking at the percent exact agreement and percent close agreement, you can see that for most of our subtests, for most of our modalities, we had a relatively good percent close agreement. So for most subtests, between 70 and 100. However, there were some individual subtests with very low agreement. So repetition of words, repetition of non-words, and reading words were all around 10 to 30%. And on our bland and Altman limits of agreement analysis, again, you can see that all of the modality scores, the differences are falling within the acceptable range. And most importantly here is that bottom score, the overall aphasia severity, which is gives an indicator of aphasia severity, but also the presence or absence of aphasia. And the greatest difference there is within the range of the acceptable difference. However, again, we saw that there were some subtests where the range of difference fell outside of the acceptable limit, and these were comprehension of spoken words, repetition of complex words, non-words and sentences, and reading complex words and function words. And finally, we ran the Wilcoxon-signed rank test to see if there was any statistically significant difference between the online and face-to-face assessor results. And interestingly, we found that the only one that was different was the written picture description, which was an unusual finding because both clinicians scored this after the assessment of the same stimulus. But what does this mean? So it means that overall aphasia severity and the modality means when conducted via telepractice are comparable to what you'd get face-to-face. So we can reliably use the CAT to determine whether or not somebody has aphasia if we administer it online, and also determine the relative strengths and weaknesses between their functioning. However, some subtests demonstrated low levels of agreement and were significantly different between online and face-to-face, and these were mostly within the repetition subtests. Most of the errors that we saw were phonological, or errors or differences in scoring were phonological in nature. So the online assessor had recorded their response as trade, whereas the face-to-face assessor had recorded it as frayed, or morphological in nature. So for example, online they had recorded crucifixion and face-to-face had recorded crucifix. And it was difficult to determine if that was due to an audio delay, audio distortion, or a true aphasic error. What was interesting was that some clinicians marked the participant delayed even when they knew it was to be related to the audio or the internet connectivity, which means that we need to be really clear when recording errors online as to what we think the cause is. So some important lessons learned from this is that we can use the CAT via telepractice, but some of the subtests should be interpreted with caution and not administered in isolation. We really need to be careful about the audio and video quality and the impact it's having on the person with aphasia's scores. And one option to overcome this could be to consider recording at the participant end, whatever their responses are, and then reviewing this outside of the session if there's concerns about quality. But all in all, we decided that the comprehensive aphasia test could be reliably used as an outcome measure if we administered it online. And so we went on to the next study, which is the most exciting for me, where we looked at the preliminary effectiveness of TeleGAIN. So we wanted to do a larger study to see if we could show some more positive findings and to see where across the ICF we were seeing these gains. We also wanted to describe the experiences of people with aphasia and what they thought that TeleGAIN had done for them. So all in all, we had 18 people that we could include the data for. And these were supported by 7 communication partners who helped them with the technology. There was a broad range in age and also a broad range in months post-onset and severity levels. So we had people with no expressive communication join in the group, and also people that had only mild high-level language difficulties. What was really neat about this study was that we were able to include people across a wide geographical area. So I've done the best I can to try and put these little people in the right places for where they connected into therapy. And we had people from major cities and rural areas. And one participant was actually a grey nomad who travelled in the caravan and connected in through free council Wi-Fi and Macca's Wi-Fi throughout the study. And all of the methods were the same as the pilot study, except that the outcome measures and the initial training session was administered online. 7 groups were run in total by 4 different SLPs, and I was one of those. And we added in a whole bunch of other outcome measures to see where we can get some change. We also used a 14-question aphasia-friendly satisfaction questionnaire and conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews with the people with aphasia and their communication partners at the end of the therapy session. The full findings for this study can be found in the IJSLP article, which is included in the reference list. But we found through this that all of the domains of the ALA demonstrated statistically significant change. All domains of the QCL were statistically significant, as well as the COMACT, which is a communication activities measure. The response on the CAT was variable across the different subtests, but we did see statistically significant change in comprehension of spoken language, reading and writing. However, it should be noted that as we didn't have a controlled group, these findings only demonstrate preliminary effectiveness. On the participant satisfaction questionnaire, you can see that participants were highly satisfied with the intervention. And it was interesting because they reported that they could easily see and hear the speech pathologist, which was interesting because we did experience technology issues. And you can also see an important one there, that they would recommend the group to others and had high overall satisfaction with TeleGAIN. And then the qualitative data really told the story of this experience for people with aphasia. So there were 5 main themes that emerged from the data. So people talked about the group format, the structure and the activities that were included in the group. And most participants felt that there was a good balance of conversation and therapy activities, and also that there were means by which they could participate in those activities. They talked about their experience of tele-practice, including the technology breakdowns, the usability of the software, and their ability to participate. It was interesting because people with aphasia seemed to be much more satisfied with the technology than the communication partners. One of the most central themes that emerged was this feeling around a positive group environment. So people with aphasia talked about the importance of being supported to participate, that it allowed them to build really good relationships with the other people in the group that had a shared experience, that the group members celebrated their successes, and that they felt accepted regardless of the severity of their aphasia. And then people with aphasia talked about the positive outcomes that they experienced. So they talked about changes in confidence, that they were participating in more activities of daily life, that they were feeling more independent, and that they were able to do more. And they discussed their high satisfaction with TeleGAIN, and often that it exceeded their expectations, and they couldn't believe they could get these results over the internet. The reason why I have it represented there in this diagram, though, was that a key finding that emerged was that the positive group environment was central to the participants' experience of the group. So what I mean by that is, if the people with aphasia were in a group where they felt like they were making friends and they had good group rapport, even if they had really challenging technology experience with audio delay or connectivity issues, they still reported really positive outcomes and really high satisfaction with TeleGAIN. However, if a person with aphasia was in a group where they didn't get on so well with their group participants, there were challenging group dynamics, or some group members had some different pragmatics, that seemed to amplify the impact of the technology breakdowns and impacted the outcomes they thought that they had experienced and their satisfaction with the intervention. So what we learned out of that is that group cohesion is key to the success of aphasia group therapy, and this might be even more so when delivered via tele-practice. And we had groups with really mixed participants. So some groups had somebody who was 21 in with somebody who was 58 and 75. And it seemed to be more important to group together people who had shared interests rather than their aphasia type, their severity, their months post-onset, or their age. People with aphasia also really like talking to people in other parts of Australia. It was also really key to have communication supports that enabled modalities for expressive and receptive language. But people with aphasia talked at considerable length about how important personalised communication supports. So all of those resources that they sent in, like their photos and their menus and their house plans, really facilitated conversation and renegotiation of identity. It's also really nice because the communication partners talked about how gathering all of those resources together in between sessions facilitated more communication between them at home. And finally, we wanted to understand the experience of the speech pathologists who provided TeleGAIN, whether they thought that TeleGAIN made a difference to the lives of people with aphasia, and also consider how feasible it was to implement TeleGAIN into clinical practice. So we had three speech pathologists who delivered the program participate, and they did in-depth semi-structured interviews with an independent interviewer. It was felt that I was too close to the data because I had done so many groups and had also provided structured debriefing sessions to the clinicians over their time running the groups. And the findings from this project can be found in the aphasiology paper on the screen. So we found four main themes from this data. The first being how the speech pathologists described their experience of the online group. And it was interesting because that they talked about it with respect to how similar or different it was to face-to-face therapy. So they mentioned that the group rapport could be facilitated the way that it could be face-to-face, but it took a little bit more time. But also one experience really highlighted some of the difference between online and face-to-face, whereas speech pathologists recounted when a person with aphasia had disclosed some significant mental health issues, and she felt it was really challenging to provide support, like making them a cup of tea or putting your arm around their shoulder because they were disconnected geographically. However, she thought at the end she'd got through it, and they were able to continue on with the session. Speech pathologists also talked about the barriers and facilitators to implementing the group. This was primarily around the technology issues and their extra role in troubleshooting the tech. So they found that it added a cognitive load when they were trying to provide the intervention while simultaneously running the technology. However, after about 6 weeks of doing TeleGAIN, and when everybody was getting the hang of it, the technology wasn't such a barrier. They identified a number of benefits for people with aphasia, but most importantly that the group offered a supportive and meaningful activity for people with aphasia and connections with others. And finally, they talked about the feasibility of implementation. So with this, they decided that it definitely was feasible definitely was important, but it would need consideration with how it would go in different video conferencing platforms and clinical services. However, they highlighted the fact that it was obvious that this would make a significant difference to access for people with aphasia, and that it was something that people with aphasia really wanted. So the lessons we learned from this project was that technology and communication breakdowns will happen, but they can be managed, sometimes creatively. So the picture that you can see there on the screen was me trying to help a person with aphasia to understand they needed to turn on their microphone, which was above my finger number 2. And this is where the aphasia-friendly troubleshooting support really came in handy. We learnt that tele-practice is different to face-to-face, but you can still build good therapeutic rapport with people with aphasia. And like any other clinical skill, it gets easier the more that you do it. So from all of those studies, the key findings that we found overall is that it's possible to deliver an online aphasia group from start to finish via telepractice. And this is important for clinical implementation as well as research, particularly now when we're facing such challenging times. We also know that everyone is on a learning curve, so both the speech pathologist and the people with aphasia are all taking their time to work out the technology, and it's important to be patient and flexible. We learned that online groups are much like face-to-face and may offer similar benefits at a distance, particularly in social connections and the opportunity to share their personal life history. However, communication supports are absolutely essential to enable participation, and that it can have a positive impact on the lives of people with aphasia. So TeleGAIN showed me that for people with aphasia who are isolated geographically, socially, due to post-stroke comorbidities, and now due to COVID, connections with others, particularly those who have also experienced aphasia, is challenging at best and impossible at worst. Aphasia group therapy via telepractice brings social connections to the home. As one participant in this study reflected, before the panel, I wanted to die. Since the panel, I am not alone in aphasia. I have a new aphasia family. And that's the end.
Thank you so much, Rachelle. And here are some wonderful resources I see.
Yes, so I've just included those, which is just a snapshot of things that are around.
The first being of particular interest, it's the TeleGAIN manual and resources that you've so kindly offered for free access on the Aphasia CRE repository site.
Yes, they're all there. So all of the PowerPoint slides that we use to run the sessions, any of the communications that we sent out to people with aphasia, and the TeleGAIN manual are all available for download.
Okay. So we'll just swap over to Slido shortly to go through the questions that our audience members have posed. Okay, the first one here for you, Rachelle, is about training your therapists. How did you do that? Were there knowledge or skills that you saw as essential for them to progress, to being able to run groups, or that are associated with more successful groups?
Yeah, so the speech pathologists that ran the groups had varying experience both with group therapy and telepractice. So each of them participated in a 2-hour training session, which included training on the features of Adobe Connect, as well as a big chunk of training in supported conversation techniques for people with aphasia, but how we matched those supported conversation techniques to the video conferencing platform. We didn't do a huge amount of training around how to run a group or how to facilitate a group. However, looking back, that's probably something that would be of considerable benefit. But as I mentioned during the presentation, after each of the group sessions, or if clinicians were running 2 groups a week, we would connect in weekly for a debrief. And that was really important, to have a time and space to undertake reflective practice, to have somebody to troubleshoot and to get ideas from. And it was interesting because over time, those debriefing sessions changed from being troubleshooting the technology and working out how to use the whiteboard or supporting conversation, to managing group dynamics and managing difficult personalities and pragmatics. So I think we all learned a lot over that 12-week period. And I think if you had a lot of experience running on group therapy, the transition would likely be a bit easier. But everybody took about 4 to 6 weeks to really get the hang of it.
And that's such a crucial point, isn't it, to be conscious of the amount of transition time that it can take to work online, but also the idea that group facilitation is not necessarily an easy process, and even face-to-face experience can benefit from debriefing. So it's great that you had that in your program. The next question asks about Adobe Connect. Thank you for a great presentation. Would you still recommend Adobe Connect these days?
I would actually. It was a very good platform for delivering this kind of therapy. We also used it in another study where we delivered constraint-induced language therapy online. The value of Adobe Connect that most of the other popular platforms like Zoom and Skype offers is that Adobe Connect allows you to change the different screen sizes. So from the clinician's end. So I could change how much of the resources the person was seeing on their screen at any one time. If I was giving somebody a visual cue, or there was a participant with aphasia that relied a lot more on gesture, I could make the videos much bigger. And any changes that I made on my end was reflected at the participant's end. So that is one of the most significant benefits. Also, the usability of Adobe was so great, because the link was the same every time. They didn't have to type their name. They didn't have to sign up for anything. All they had to do was type their name and enter the room.
Great. Okay. Another question is about different types of therapy goals. So do you think that TeleGAIN was as good at addressing impairment as participation or quality of life issues?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for whoever that was. Look, we didn't see significant change on the comprehensive aphasia test. So at that level, and we did see significant change on the quality of life measures, so the ALA and the QCL, and also on the COMACT, which is activities and participation. So I would say that it had a much greater impact on activities and participation and quality of life. And it really depended on the participant and their experience of the group as to how much impact it seemed to have on their impairment. So I haven't pulled the numbers apart, but anecdotally, again, I would come back to, if participants felt like they had good rapport and they had a lot of opportunity for conversation participation, they appeared to get a lot more out of the group. It was also notable that people with more severe aphasia more often had a communication partner attend the group with them. And in that sense, often the clinician had to manage the communication partner's participation and encourage the independence of the person with aphasia. So I think that in terms of talk time and conversation practice, it probably wasn't as high for people with more severe aphasia.
All right. Next question is about copyright. Any issues there with using paper versions of assessments that one owns on digital platforms, like scanning for use in video conferencing and that kind of?
So you do need to have copyright approval. However, I understand at the moment Pearson have temporarily waived the copyright requirements for their assessments. We had copyright approval to present the different assessments in the online format from all of the providers. So for the CAT and the ALA and the QCL, so you do need to look into that before using it online. The information about Pearson can be found on their website as well.
Okay, that's a good tip. Right. Next question is about exclusion criteria. What were they when recruiting members with aphasia for TeleGAIN?
So we excluded anyone who had had aphasia for less than 12 months. We had and anyone who had any co-occurring cognitive deficits, and that was it. So there was no exclusion around severity. Because of the National Stroke Foundation grant, we were able to provide internet to people who didn't have it in their home, as well as a laptop and headset microphone and web camera to them. However, we found that the majority of people had internet at home and the technology that they needed, and that any range of severity was able to participate in the group if they were provided the right communication supports.
Was there a particular rationale, if I may ask, around the time post onset that was selected? So greater than a year.
Looking back, we probably could have done 6 months. At the time, we chose 12 months because we had thought that that is probably when most of their outpatient therapy would have ended and their access to other services would be limited. And because it was around bringing people greater access to services, that's what we landed on.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question here, how exactly did you include the people with aphasia's personal documents? So did they send them to you before therapy or via the cloud, or did they upload it during the session itself?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the therapy, we sent them the full list of the 12 topics that would be covered in TeleGAIN, and they knew from the outset that it was expected that they would bring something along to the group. We offered to scan to receive those by the post and scan them in for people with aphasia who weren't able to do that, but most people had somebody, be it a communication partner or a family member or friend, that was able to email us the resources. And even when that wasn't possible, people held their photos up to the screen or picked up their laptop and walked us through their house. But where possible, we tried to have it incorporated into the PowerPoint slides before the session.
So a nice mix of structure and impromptu engagement.
Yes, and one of our participants had an iPad with all of her pictures and was using Proloquo to go, and she would have that out and hold that up to the screen during the session. So
yeah, there'd be lots of spontaneous sort of need as well, being met in that way. We've got another question here about satisfaction from the communication partners. So were you able to tease out why they were perhaps less satisfied with the tech compared to members with aphasia? And maybe that felt disabling for the CPs, but any kind of tech and any kind of engagement was enabling for the members with aphasia themselves.
This is a really great question. Thank you. And I'm going to have to think about this before I answer, but I think that the people with aphasia, the overwhelming sense from them was that they absolutely valued the opportunity to connect with other people, and they would have done whatever it took to to have that opportunity. So I had a fellow who was in rural New South Wales, and he had significant connectivity issues and was driving all around the libraries and the council parks to try and get good connectivity to join us in the group sessions. And his data had to be excluded because he wasn't able to participate in all of the sessions. But he overwhelmingly just wanted that chance to have a chat with somebody else who understood what he was going through. I think the communication partners also shouldered a lot of the responsibility to try and troubleshoot that, and the group kept going in the background. So I suspect that they had this pressing need to try and fix the problem so that their spouse or friend or partner could participate.
And maybe that's kind of the red thing that they sort of were left with in their minds, maybe.
Yeah, yep.
Sure. Another question here about the range of participants in TeleGAIN. Can you remind us of that in relation to severity and auditory comp levels? Any ideas who this might not work for, this type of service?
Yeah, hang on, just give me a second. I'll go back to my notes. We had a really broad range of severity levels. So we had several people who had no expressive language output who participated in the group, but fairly good receptive language. And we had people who had quite high level language difficulties. With respect, so I would say that really if we're getting the communication supports right, if we're supporting expressive and receptive language and providing an input and output modality, anybody with aphasia can participate in the group. However, we found it difficult for people who didn't have a communication partner at home and weren't able to do the troubleshooting. So if there was an issue with the technology that couldn't be overcome, it limited their participation. So it was less about severity in terms of the participation in the intervention, but using the technology.
Okay. In India, the users for computers versus smart tablets, so things like iPad versus smartphones, are quite different. Higher numbers of smartphone users. So now I'm just trying to find where this question links. There's another that attaches somewhere else. Okay, here we go. What do you think? So regarding the assessment/intervention procedure on a smartphone, so if a clinician's on the computer and a member is on their phone.
I believe there is some emerging research that has looked at this potential, also with respect to mHealth. And I can't give you the reference off the top of my head. With applying the TeleGAIN procedure to a smartphone, I think you would have to do it very cautiously because, as I said, we very carefully matched the video conferencing platform to our task analysis and to the intervention. So I found that a lot of the features in, say, Zoom or Skype don't have the same functionality when you put it through a smartphone as they do through a PC. So if you were able to match your task to the platform, it would be feasible. But also considering that the screen size is just so much smaller on a smartphone, if you've got 4 participants with aphasia as well as your therapy resources, I think it would be very challenging for the person with aphasia to interact with those resources. So, for example, in the groups, we had a whiteboard where people could type their responses. There was the pointer that they could move around the screen to make choices. They could draw, they could move things around, they could do naming activities. I think if you reduce the size to a smartphone, those kinds of tasks would be really challenging.
Yep. Okay. Can you talk about the supports that a person might need if they didn't have a support person at home to help with that?
Yeah, so we had a number of people who didn't have a support person at home, and we found that, so the initial training session that we ran with them outside of the pilot was done online. And for this training, it frequently required all types of modalities possible to get them through that session. So telephone calls, text messages, we sent them aphasia-friendly instructions in the post, and it would sometimes require two or three training sessions to get them feeling really confident. With one person with aphasia, we actually had to call his family and ask if there was a support worker available. And it took about 3 to 4 weeks for him to become independent with accessing the technology. The most significant issue was if there was actually something that happened with the device. So if there was a hardware update or a software update,
Something unexpected.
And it wasn't anything to do with the intervention, but impacted their ability. They had to update their browser or something like that. That tended to be where things got a little anxiety ridden. So I don't think that the majority of people with aphasia need a communication partner at every session, but certainly in the first training session and potentially the first couple of sessions, it's incredibly useful.
Yep. Can you talk about the tech needs of each of the participants? So what kinds of devices did they use and their internet connectivity that they needed?
So 11 out of 18, I believe it was, of the participants that were in our larger study used their own home computer, and we sent them a headset microphone, a Plantronics device, which is actually what I'm using today, and a Logitech web camera. And then for people who had no technology at home, we sent them a Lenovo touchscreen laptop. In one of the groups, we found that one participant was having a lot of trouble participating because she couldn't use the mouse. So we ended up sending her one of the touchscreen laptops as well, and that made a big difference. In terms of internet connectivity, participants had ADSL at home, except for 4 of our participants who used either the 4G hotspot that we provided, or, as I said, connected in through council-free Wi-Fi or McDonald's Wi-Fi. Bearing in mind, though, that the majority of these groups were run in 2013 and 2014. So we've seen significant improvements in internet connectivity since then. But I would recommend that anybody participating in an aphasia group has a headset microphone, because that makes a significant difference to the audio quality. It limits all of the echo and background noise, and really helps with the clarity of the sound coming through.
Sure, that makes great sense. Well, guess what, Rachelle? You've still got 7 more questions awaiting you on Slido, but we'll have to stop here in the interest of time. The great news is that we have an Aphasia CRE Twitter chat happening tomorrow night, with opportunities for people to ask questions on Twitter to people like Rachelle and other experts, specifically around the topic of online aphasia groups. We're going to have 2 more after tomorrow night on various other topics as well. So it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for some friendly, supportive discussion and question asking. So I hope you'll join us then, Rachelle, to address some of these additional questions. Do check out our Aphasia CRE Twitter handle @Aphasia CRE for more details about the Twitter chat and the future ones as well. Thank you so much, Rachelle, for the talk today. Also to our attendees for participating. If you have a moment, please do provide feedback for future via the Slido app under the polls tab. We do look forward to hosting our next CRE seminar in May. It will fall this time on a Tuesday morning in Australia on the 12th of May at 9 AM Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is 7 PM on Monday in Boston, which is Eastern Standard Time. So we're really excited to have Professor Swathi Kiran presenting from Boston University, and her talk is entitled Understanding and Predicting Outcomes in Aphasia Rehabilitation. Thank you, Rachelle. Thank you everyone again, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.